All right, so this next skill is specific to fractions and the process of getting that square root off the bottom. It's called rationalizing the denominator. Again, you've done a little bit of it before at some point in the past, I believe. But the idea behind rationalizing a denominator is to get rid of the square root off the bottom so that we have at least, even though it's still going to look weird if it's got a root in it, we're at least going to have a normal denominator so we can think about halves, thirds, fourths, things that you are familiar with. My hints on how to do this. First off, try to reduce the fraction first if you can. This kind of ties back to skill 2. Like if there's something that you can do to combine them and reduce it, that might make the problem a whole lot easier. And if that fails, make the denominator a perfect square. And how do you do that? Well, you multiply the top and the bottom by the same number. Okay? And so we'll see that right away in the first example. So in example 1, I'm trying to get this square root of 3 off the bottom so that I have a normal denominator. I can't reduce it first, like root 2 and root 3 do not reduce. That's just 2 over 3. That fraction's already done. Okay, so the trick to doing these is to multiply the top and the bottom by the exact same number. Okay, the number that's going to make it a perfect square is to multiply it by itself. Okay, so if you have the square root of 3 down here, do another square root of 3. Because then on the bottom, you have the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, which is the square root of 9, which is just 3. Anytime you take two square roots that are the same, and you multiply them by each other, you're just going to end up with a number that's underneath there. That is actually the definition of what a square root is. Two of the same thing multiplied together to get that. Then on the top, clean it up. You have a 2 on the outside. Inside the square root, a square root of 2 times the square root of 3. I'd say square root of 2 times 3, or 6. Okay, so the top is 2 square roots of 6. Okay, so we got the square root off the bottom. We should look at it and see if we can reduce it anymore. Does the 2 over 3 reduce? No. Can I reduce the 6 and the 3? No, I can't. Okay, and the reason why is that they're not like talking about the same thing. One is a root, one's a regular number. Okay, those don't cross over. They're not like living in the same planet even. So if I have a root and a regular number, I cannot reduce them because they are not like terms. I guess is probably the best way to put it. They're not talking about the same thing. So this is as far as this can go. And again, I realize it still looks kind of gross when you think about simplifying it, but now it's thirds. Okay, I have 2/3 of a square root of 6. Okay, I can, again, think about 2/3 and what that means. Example 2, trying to get rid of the square root of 18 off the bottom. First thing I should try to do is reduce it if I can. So like I look at this, these are both square roots, so if I see something I can reduce it by, great, I should do that. Or like we did in skill 2, I could smash it together. Like you've got different options here. So let's say I smash it together. 8 over 18. Well, I can reduce that fraction. I can divide them both by 2 and get 4 over 9. Okay. And if you're comfortable with this already, you can skip the next step. You can skip separating them because you know what's going to happen. I'm going to separate them apart. The square root of 4 is just going to be 2. The square root of 9 is just going to be 3. So if I see an opportunity to reduce it just on its own, do that. Okay? And if you want to figure out, well, how could I have like saved a little bit more work in here, because it's totally possible to do that, I could have looked at this fraction right away and divided them both by 2. And had I done that, I'd have had square root of 4 over square root of 9, which would have got me there a little bit quicker. Okay, so the more comfortable you are with what we're doing here, and the more times you've seen just different scenarios, the faster you're going to get when it comes to stuff like that. Example 3, look at it, try to reduce it first if you can. I can't reduce these because one's a regular number, one's a square root. Again, not even on the same planet. They're not talking about the same thing, so that option's out. Okay, so I want to multiply by something that gets rid of the square root off the bottom. Okay. So if I want to get rid of a square root of 10, do another 10. Okay. You're always just going to copy whatever that number is down there. Okay. Because then, on the bottom, when I put these two together, that's going to make the square root of 100, which is just the number 10. Square root of 100 is just 10. Okay. On the top, I've got a 5 on the outside and a square root of 10 on the inside. Okay. And at the end of it, just like any other fraction ever, look to see if you can reduce it. Okay. I can't reduce these because that's a square root and that's a regular number, but I can reduce these. Okay. That's a 5 and a 10. 5 over 10, I can divide them both by 5 and get a 1 over a 2. So that would be 1 square root of 10 over 2. Okay, and that's nice. Again, halves. Square root of 10 is 3 point something. So I have a little bit over 3 halves. And now I know what that number actually looks like. At the beginning, no clue. Okay. And then the last one's one of the ones out of the book. I don't think I put it on the assignment because it's kind of weird and tricky. But we can do it as an example just because they throw some weird stuff at you sometimes. Okay. So this one, try to reduce it first. Okay. So notice that I can divide both of these by, I can divide both of these by 3. Okay. So if I do that, I have the square root of 1 on the top and negative square root of 7 on the bottom. Okay, and that's not much better, but it helps a little bit, okay, because that makes this number easier to work with. So, to get the square root off the bottom, multiply by whatever's down there. Okay, so it's 7, use a 7. And the fact that it's negative, again, doesn't matter, doesn't affect anything. Don't use the negative at all. Just make sure at the end of the problem that the answer is negative. Okay, so on the top, square root of 1 times the square root of 7. Make the square root of 7. On the bottom, square root of 7 times the square root of 7, make the square root of 49, which is, again, just goes right back to the number you started with. And again, at the end of it, just make sure that the answer is negative. And the negative could go anywhere, top, bottom, up front. Okay. And so yeah, when it comes to getting a fraction simplified, getting a square root off the bottom, there are different options, but always look for reducing it first and then multiply by something to get rid of the square root if you need to.